Okay, so are we ready to start webcasting? Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Councillor Mary Wheel Charity Committee. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube and welcome to everybody who's in the room tonight as well as those watching elsewhere. Before we start the meeting, I'd ask members of the committee to please make sure, and indeed everyone else, to make sure that your mobiles are on silent or switched off, because we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in Grenfell. I have received British responses from Councillor Claresons, and I know that Councillor Paxton and maybe Councillor Yasin leave early. The minutes of the previous meeting. Do any members have an interest to declare? Thank you. The minutes have been circulated. Are you happy that I sign those to the correct record?
Great.
Will.
Can I please make a point that the item 4 on page 12 was a full recommendation, and that the minutes should be redrafted as such. The action was carried out, as I understand it, and the recommendation was taken to leadership, but it hasn't been drafted in minutes correctly. And then also that the wording in the used here in the minutes would be the wording in the work programme, the batch from next meeting.
We have to make that amendment. And is everyone happy that I sign the amended minutes?
Great.
Thank you. Once that change has been made. The first report on our agenda tonight is the Social Investment Impact Report. And this is last year the leadership team approved a social investment strategy, and part of that strategy is producing an annual report. So can I ask Councillor Emma Will, member for Committee Parks and Leisure, to join us, and officers. So welcome to Dan. I think some of the officers may need a bit of introduction, Emma.
Right, so I'll do my best. Shall I? Let me sit.
To join us.
Wonderful team. Right, I'll sit at the other end. Here we go. I'll sit here. That team. Okay, fine. Thank you. So, yes. So, thank you, committee, for giving us the opportunity to speak about this. We've got Christine here, who's our interim director of project, and now it's your title, right? But more importantly, and I'll let them introduce themselves. We've got Molly and Amy, who've never been to more, so it's their first time, and I want to thank them for the work they've done in this report. I know you've all had a chance to read it, so I'll keep my comments brief, but I think this needs to be viewed as part of a larger piece of work that we are trying to do. In that council is always socially invested. We've always tried to use our buildings and our assets and all the funding that we give to benefit our communities. But I think in the period post Grenfell, rightly, we are trying to find ways, and sometimes it's not always possible, to quantify and qualify how we're doing that and the value that we're trying to generate And that's particularly pertinent in terms of a bigger piece of work about looking at all the leases and all with the communities, the BCS, which is what which will be coming next year. So this is a sort of first step to that. How do we qualify and value all these, social investment and all these different things? But I'm not going to say more than that. I know you read it. And what's the question for Molly and Amy who've done the work? But I think if you see it in that context, it's not just a standalone, but it's part of a bigger and wider piece of work that we're doing, trying to make sure that we use all of these buildings and assets in the best way and quantified as well.
Thank you. Well, welcome to the officers committee. This is the first time to our committee. Bonnie and Emma, we can see who Christine is because she's put a name.
Yes.
They do just want to introduce yourselves briefly.
Sure, yes, so I'm Molly Pritchard, I'm the Social Investment Lead, and I'm Amy Edwards, and I'm the Social Investment Officer. So we are the Social Investment.
You are a team. You do have two, so that's very good. Right, I'm sure the committee's got plenty of questions. Portia, do you want to start us off, or shall I come back to you? I'll let you settle down. Lucy.
I just was going to ask one question, which was focused on regarding health and wellbeing initiatives. How is the success of these programs measured beyond social value metrics, and are there sort of qualitative assessments that capture resident satisfaction in terms of benefits?
Yeah, so I mean, that kind of like touches on a really good point, I think, about kind of social investment measurement in general. Obviously what we've done here and what is mostly reported in the impact report is kind of the monetization, which is a way of sort of putting a value on these things like well-being, which is that's often a little bit more difficult to try and put a value on. So as part of the reporting and all the different projects, I think something that maybe hasn't potentially been doesn't come across so much in the report, but just to sort of show you kind of what this means in practice. There are lots of different projects and initiatives in this report that we as a team don't necessarily manage ourselves. There's, lots of different teams across the council involved with doing that. So they will have their own ways of kind of collecting data and of measuring, the success of those different initiatives, and all of those sort of things, I'm sure, are a part of it, but they're not always necessarily, we don't have a standardized way of collecting that at this point in time, but it's definitely something going forwards, which as part of the social value measurement that we want to be collecting, because with all of this, it's only as good as kind of actually what the people on the ground tell us and what residents actually feel and experience. So we tried to do a bit of that with some of the case studies, trying to sort of highlight the impact on people and that qualitative element of things, but it's certainly sort of going forward something that we'd like to sort of introduce really strongly to sit alongside these monetized figures. So.
Yeah, this first annual report is sort of where we've got to. Yeah, and I think the kind of we're stuck in this trade-off between, because Molly's right, there's something about the kind of financialization of the outcomes, which enables you then to kind of build up a whole picture and to compare outcomes across a whole range of things. So that is useful. But I think one thing we've realised also since the very start of the social investment work is that alongside that, you just need to tell the stories, because actually a lot of it is you can't do justice to simply by slapping a number on it. And I think we are, one of the reasons why it's really helpful to be having this conversation tonight is that this is our first annual report. If there are suggestions that you want to make about things that you'd like to see in the second annual report that kind of bring things to life in a different way, it's this is something which we've designed in order to evolve in that way. So kind of we're really interested in that.
I'm sure we'll discuss. Can I remind Minister and officers attending to speak very clearly and loudly, because it's quite hard to hear at the back there. Probably actually easier for people to hear on YouTube than it is in the committee room, but if you can just remember that, that'll be very helpful. Thank you, Lucy. Sydney, and then I'll come back to Portia.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I just had one question on page 27, big 27, small number 9. The paragraphs aren't numbered, but it was paragraph number 3, talking about the return on investment in relation to, this is third line down, £3.40 for every £1 spent. And this was specifically in relation to the digital and the pilot project, where it's £2.83 for every £1 invested. And my question was this: once you've done the social work and you've come up with a figure that looks as if we're getting good value for the money that's being spent, do you consider what can be done further to improve and engage with more residents? it appears that this is 338 Kensington residents out of 153,000. So numbers seem incredibly small compared to the total overall audience. But do you actually, in your work, actually make recommendations which other officers, league members, and other people can then take forward, or do you just simply look at the numbers?
So for the purposes of this report, we've just been looking at the numbers, but exactly what you just said around kind of actually how do we use this to make in decision making, but actually to improve what we're doing, because again, what's the point in doing it if it's not actually going to change anything? So, and that's definitely an aspiration of ours and something that we would like to introduce going forward, to be able to see how actually by using this to measure and evaluate what we do, we can improve the outcomes for residents, because that's kind of the bread and butter of it all.
And then my follow-on question is the £3.40 for every pound spent by nature. What's the metrics that you use to calculate that figure?
Yeah, so there's a variety of metrics which are kind of used to monetize social value, and the measurement to which we've used combines several different methods of doing it. So it comes from the government's Green Book for the Green Book, and also I think it's the Magenta Book as well. And there's a few other different ways of calculating it, and it's all kind of combined, and it uses things like fiscal savings to the Treasury, other kind of standardized metrics, and unit cost database, all lots of different kind of economic, things that economists have produced essentially, and it's all kind of verified and sort of by the government.
There is a section in the report.
Page 23.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're not economists on the house. We've kind of got people that actually using the data that is kind of used by the government to do the sort of analysis. But
I'm sure there'll be other questions about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think actually this is the nub of the issue with all of this, is that in some ways it's quite a philosophical argument that we're trying to put value on things that are often quite intangible, frankly. And it's not a science, it's quite early. I think it's quite an art form, it's quite early days for this work. But I think it's very pertinent in that regard.
And presumably you publish the metrics so that the resident can see what
Exactly, but there's no way you're ever going to replace it. Oh, only pretend that's we're not doing this. It's just trying to, rather than we think it's a good thing, actually be able to establish some more tangible ways of demonstrating that it's a good thing.
Thank you. So I'm going to come back to Portia.
Okay. Thank you, officers. I think one of the most interesting points that crossed my mind was promoting fairness. What's your definition of promoting fairness? And what measures have you put in place to ensure that fairness is promoted? And apart from what's listed here, I just want to hear your take on it more. The program started 2023 to 2024. Is there any way of you seeing what worked from 2023 till now, and how can you improve it moving forward to 2025?
So in terms of promoting fairness, so we've tried to align it as much as possible with the council's fairer action plan. So that's kind of what that's tied to, and sort of looking at the initiatives which the council is taking to, acknowledging that we do have a lot of inequality and unfairness in certain parts of the borough, and that through some certain initiatives and projects that we are undertaking, we can try and close the gaps. We're not going to be able to do everything, but trying to tailor some of the projects and I guess investment in certain areas to try and make it fairer. Sorry, what was your second question?
What measures have you put in place to ensure that you are promoting fairness? Because this is what I don't understand, promoting fairness, because if it started in 2023 with a council plan, I'm sure you would have known what worked then, because we're in 2024, moving on to 2025. You don't want to carry over a program from 2023 to 25 and you don't know what worked. Wait until 2027 until you look into what is working from what's not working. How can we improve that? What needs to be done? Is there any form of outreach?
Do you want to come in on that?
Time?
Yeah, I was just going to say that and it's particularly kind of striking given that we've got this team of two here. But there's a risk of the social business strategy kind of becoming an everything strategy for the council. And what the team doesn't do and hasn't been asked to do and isn't trying to do is in here or in the social investment strategy itself to define what the successful outcomes look like across all these areas where they're making interventions, if that makes sense. So fairness is a really good example, as Molly said. The definition of what the council is trying to achieve in terms of fairness is not rooted in the social investment strategy. It's rooted in the Fair Action Plan, which consultation is going on and it hasn't just finished. And what the social investment work will do is try and then broker the right way for different interventions across the council to contribute to the aims of that and to find ways of measuring it. But the fundamental question of, what should we be trying to do? What does good look like in terms of making the borough fairer? Is probably a question that you need to put to the team working on the Fair Action Plan rather than on the social investment strategy, if that makes sense. And we will then understand what those measures look like and incorporate them in here. And because the Fair Action Plan is still at the consultation stage and not finalised, I suspect that when we bring the second annual report back next year, we'll be able to articulate a bit more clearly how the social investment programme is then dovetailing with.
Thank you. Move on to Greg.
Thank you very much, Chad. And thank you very much for the paper. I welcome the wide-ranging nature of it, and forgive me for looking at my phone. I'm not being rude, but that's where I wrote my notes for this. And I do recognise it's a work in progress, and I'm going to be going back to the quantitative questions, but recognising that there's a qualitative answer as well. I want to focus on the leases on the social investment leases, which you cover on pages 32 through to 34. And I'm wondering, do we have a grip now of how many social investment leases there are across the borough? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, BCS leases.
BCS leases. So the BCS leases are a subset of the total social investment leases.
No, so the social investment leases would be 3 within that, so they're a subset of the BCS leases.
Exactly.
Right.
We can explain
So
that.
is it probably worth me just
Or maybe I finished my question.
Finish
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah.
So my enthusiasm gone, so
Well,
apologies.
because I think there's clearly going to be a piece on both the 3 and the 47 for you to answer, and there's going to be a value from all of them, both monetary and in terms of social investment, I'm sure. But I'm wondering what kind of leases they are, because there's a difference between a self-repair lease and other sorts of leases. And what I really want to know on a page, perhaps for next year, is what's the opportunity cost for these leases? So, how much could we get commercially for each one? How much are we actually getting for each one because we let them a lesser value in order to realise the social investment? And then is that delta being filled by the calculation on page 23, which I have to say I haven't really got my head around in terms of doing the calculation, or is there a further delta, or is there a surplus there? I think that would be another column. And I'd see a list on a page, but how close are you to getting an answer that fits my question?
to
Do you want to, I can
I'll have a little,
you have
yeah, I'll have a little,
go.
I'll have a little go because we set up the social investment strategy, including social investment leases, as a post-Grenfell look differently at how we do properties. So we've got a commercial portfolio, and we use that to fund council services by getting market rents in effect. But is there a portion of it that we ought to be looking at to say, should we discount this because we're getting alternatives delivered instead of money, but social value? So the 3 leases that we've done so far are essentially, I would say, piloting that as a programme. What Emma has done since Emma became the lead member is to start to think exactly in line with the question that you asked, which is how can you know what it is that you're subsidising if you've got a myriad of arrangements? And the reality of it is that we've got 47 voluntary and community sector leases, all on a different basis. Some are in exchange for service delivery, commission services. Some are in exchange for there's a grant and they're paying the rent. Some are at different levels of rent. Some are peppercorn, and they've happened historically, and we've never really quantified the level of subsidy that we're giving. And part of the work that we're doing now is to say, actually, there should be something which demonstrates how you arrived at that, and therefore what's fair.
over time. And that will take time to work through because we've got lots of historic arrangements. But actually, if we start thinking about, you've got either grants or we're paying, and it could be that we're paying the bills, we might be paying the rates, we might be paying the utilities, a whole range of areas where we're subsidising. Some have full repair and insuring leases, some don't, and we cover all of the responsibility. So just understanding the differences between all of the different lease arrangements, but thinking about it in terms of social investment by saying not all of what we do is for commercial gain. Some of it is because there are things which are better delivered by community or voluntary organisations or are contributing significantly to the life of the borough that we're comfortable to subsidise, but we need to understand it in the way that you're saying. We need to understand, one, the subsidy, and two, the return, and three, ask ourselves, is that worth doing? And I don't think we've been in a position to do that until now. And obviously it's going to take time to work our way up and then say, well, actually, what is this, the word that Emma's referred to, on what basis do we move forward? And with new arrangements, what should they look like, and how do we demonstrate fairness or the level of subsidy and our assessment of whether that is a reasonable subsidy for that activity? I don't know if that gives you.
It's an extremely helpful answer, Christine. Thank you. So if I'm leading from that, in a year's time, you'll be able to come back to me with a page, probably more than one page, with a list of 47 BCS leases, or you'll at least have that information, and you'll work through those questions that you set out. And I'm taking it that the three that you described, Emma, as the social investment leases are actually more recent ones that have been done under the new regime.
Exactly.
So is it 50 in total, or?
I guess it is, actually, I think.
Is it 47 plus 3?
Let's check that.
We'll check that.
Yeah, it doesn't, I've got the ballpark, but
Yeah,
I guess next year you'll have a page with all the information on it, and I'll be able to count them. So that's.
I think it's probably worth stressing that, and this was a piece of work that I inherited with this team, is that the social investment work that Molly and Emma do obviously goes across not just leases. Obviously, they're looking at the idea of early contract we've done in parks, working libraries, and that's articulated here. But once I started to see this work, it became clear to me that this was kind of me at the foothill of the Alps trying to sort out the great BCS jigsaw, as Christine said. We've just got all these these historic ad hoc arrangements that are all different. Some people pay rent, some people don't, some people pay their utilities, and there's no rhyme or reason to any of it. It's just how it is. But that we could use this as part of a framework to say when those leases, and we're not going to say on the 1st of June next year everyone's is going to change. No. As they come up, we'll say, look, these are some of the measures we're trying to use to. We know you could do good things, but we want to try and.
Should we make a recommendation that next year, as part of this report, we have a list of those leases, because they are such a big part, I suspect, of our social investment strategy, that it is worthwhile listing them all, their terms, and their value, and well, we can perhaps talk before then about what columns need to go in there. But I think it would be very interesting and helpful to see.
Definitely. I think that's exactly right. And of course, I'm sure most of these organisations do great work, but we need to understand as a council what we're spending our money on, or the opportunity cost of.
Exactly. But I'm happy to say that we'll do that, but I don't want to underestimate what an enormous piece of work that is. I've been along with Mary at this council a while, and we know that others have tried and failed. And she has to try to unpick this and put it into a better.
Well, we'll see how you get on.
So I don't want to overpromise on this one. I
think the list is not an overpromise.
No, the list in itself
is just sorted out. But we do want a little bit of transparency by this time.
Yeah, no, and I think we have a list actually already.
It's a work in progress already. So yeah.
But I think I anticipate there will be another report, more specifically the BCS. About how we're hoping to manage it, and then we will have to consult very widely on what
what our plans are around that.
I mean, this list may not be the end, this report may not be the end table of this list every year, but I think next year, our
Exactly.
recommendation is that it's included.
And I did focus on leases. I realise social investment is a much wider piece than that, but you have, one has to focus on something.
Exactly. And I'm not responsible for the other stuff anyway.
If I just might add one thing, that I would bet that there's not a local authority in the country that doesn't have the historic patchwork of subsidised leases to bodies, as it were, that if for one reason or another it's keen to subsidise. So this position that we're in at the moment, yeah, we are absolutely keen to lift the lid on it and adopt a more transparent, consistent approach. But I, you know, if we can do it over the next year in the way that we talked about, we'd probably be among the few who had actually done.
We're not expecting you to.
No, I accept that.
To list it.
But I don't want people to feel too alarmed by where we are at the moment, because actually I think it's just an absolutely standard position for local authorities.
But we will give you a list of the, yeah, we can give you a list.
Can I just reassure any other councillors present? I'll be taking questions from other councillors once I've been around the committee, in case you think I'm going to forget you. I'm not. So I'm going to move around the table now to Will.
Evening, nice to meet you. Welcome to the scrutiny. I think that we're supposed to be a critical friend, by the way. We're not supposed to be, you know, just bashing
Exactly.
people. We're supposed to add value as well. First of all, I want to say that I think this is a very welcome paper, and it's at least, as Emma and others have said, this is a piece of work that's really been going for, you know, well before I joined the council. And it's an extremely worthwhile piece of work, and it's all the better. Being an engineer myself, I like to see the numbers as well as seeing the quality of the direction that things going. But one picture can tell a story, numbers can tell you a bit more of where the facts. I think it's a very comprehensive summary, but it's not very easy, as has been said already, to follow the methodology, despite page 23, I think it was mentioned by Dan. That sets it out clearly in sort of conceptual terms. But what I would find very useful would be a worked example in an appendix or something to this report that says to how this actually works. I know there's some more information on how this is approached in the paper that's flagged by a link at the beginning, which is the social investment strategy. And there's some objectives in that, but still, it's not easy to put one's brain around how this actually works. And for instance, my select committee I chair, not my select chair, is Family Insurance Services, and we'll be looking into this concept in the context of that particular department's work and its partnership work with others. And it'd be really useful, having had something from you on work example, then to get them to do a work example in the context of the work they do, but also in the way of transformations and budget, work, those sort of things, because these things need to mesh together. Well, that was the first was a request. And the second one is a real distraction in my terms. Is I don't know whether others agree with this, that particularly the first time that this the numbers are mentioned are on page 23 under section 3. Which is it comes up with a figure of £6,19,738.86, not 85 pence or 87 pence, but 86 pence. And the figure of 6 million, I really don't think really consider that. But it goes through the whole paper. Like, that's just the way it's been done. Sort of noted. I think a figure that's relevant. I mean, maybe in that context, 6.1 million would be relevant. Whereas if you're talking about 50,000, maybe 40, around 47, 48. Or something to be roughly relevant. Those are my 2 points.
Two clear suggestions for your for the next iteration of the report.
And this hasn't been finalised, by the way, so we can make
Still
amendments
round up.
before we.
Thank you. Joanna.
Thank you. It's fascinating read. Yes, as Emma says, we've seen the text at it before, but this is the first time to actually put a monetary sum on it. For me, I want to know to what extent you have considered or might consider an independent review, so that we're not just marking our own homework, because there's an element of sort of patting ourselves on the back. So it would be good to see some challenge to it. And then secondly, on a purely practical basis, gets to page 4. At the end of page 4, for you to actually find out what social value means. And actually, I think you need to put it front and centre. And if you actually look at background methodology, I was always taught as a lawyer that you shouldn't use the same word that you are trying to define in your definition. So you know, social investment is how we describe how we get the best possible social return. And you just go around in circles. So for me, those are my two personal suggestions and the question. Richard?
Thank you. As everybody said, it's a welcome paper and welcome to the team and to the scrutiny. The figures sound amazing, you know, and it's obviously there's positive impact, but like it's been said, not knowing the formula of how it's calculated, it's a bit tricky to understand the figures. So what I would really like to know is for every pound, I mean, across the board, it seems for pound, we're roughly making 2.5–3% return. Does that pound, is it net of expenses or gross? That would be very interesting to know. So, I mean, I can take an example, Leighton House, amazing, but do we account for, in that pound investment, do we account for, you know, what's the footfall compared to the, you know, even the general public of the borough, the tourism? Does it take into account how many members of staff are there? So, you know, there, let's say, I don't know how many numbers, but if there are 7 staff, you know, how many people have, you know, do they, what footfall is it that justifies that those members? So I would really, I mean, I think personally, I would really be interested in that.
Yeah.
That £1 is net or gross.
I wonder whether, looking at what Councillor Pascal's suggestion, that maybe 2 or 3 worked examples, one for a lease, one, you know, just under different versions of the headings, because I think there are kind of that we could find the right way to answer that. I think that question as part of what Councillor Pascal suggested, was to kind of walk through 2 or 3 different kinds, because there's so many different, you know, there's such a variety of the kinds of projects and kinds of initiatives in here that one work is up on its own. Why not paint the full picture?
I don't want to be too ambitious.
Well, I think it's, I mean, we'll do what we can for this year, but I think for next year, having that kind of, we had a real, it's been one of the main focuses for the team in the time since we published the strategy itself last year, to figure out what the right way to do this was. We knew we wanted a tool to measure it. We spent a bit of time thinking about, you know, should we develop our own tool? And it became kind of clear quite soon that, you know, we need a much bigger team, and it's kind of it would be a much slower bit of work if you were starting from scratch. So then what we were doing was kind of shopping for something that we could take off the shelf that was going to be genuinely helpful to us. But I absolutely accept the challenge that a bit more kind of transparency is the wrong word, but just a bit more kind of explanation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And actually, I think your question underlines the whole problem with trying to do this in a sense, because before you get very far, you're running into exactly those questions. And then, of course, it's apples and pears, because each of these examples is different and will have different inputs. And so I think, as I said, this is kind of work I inherited, and I think it has some value, and it's helpful to try, but you'd be an absolute idiot to try and take this in isolation as measuring the value of anything we do, because it's not very, it's an art. It's really not a science. It's an art. It's a sort of stab at what it might be. I think you've provided some very good, and you just flagged up how far it can only go so far. And I think actually it's really helpful.
I'm going to pose a question that Claire, who's I haven't been able to discuss any of these questions with Claire because this was very recently that she gave her apologies, and she's asked to, first of all, she said that she'd possibly like to discuss some of this in housing, and secondly, I suspect it'll particularly be around the leases, but that's up to her to organise that side of the meeting. She's asked to how the decisions are made about the allocation or spending of works contracts, social value, how are they made? I think probably the answer to that is the procurement strategy, but perhaps we could elaborate on that.
I think it's in the legislation, so there's 10% on contracts. And
yeah, but then how do we decide?
Oh, how do we decide how to spend? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's
going to vary.
Yeah. That's a good question. So that's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's something which is being worked through at the moment, and I know that the strategic procurement team are in the process of developing a policy that is exactly that. How do we decide, you know, when we've got social value in these contracts, which is, you know, mandated in any contract over 100 grand? you know, who's going to get the benefit of that? How is it going to be delivered? How are residents going to be engaged and involved in that process as well? So that is definitely coming, but it's not something that we've had like a set way of doing up to now.
So the answer is it's a work in progress.
Yeah, although it is also worth saying that because this is happening live already, and because it's not happening in accordance with a kind of strictly defined policy. So in housing, for example, where we're obviously well into our major works programme, we're getting significant social value contribution through some of those contracts that have already been let. And as Molly said, for works that have been done on a particular estate, so take the Silchester estate where there's kind of a very high value major works going on at the moment, we'll work quite closely with the Residents Association to understand what their priorities would be for investment that would make a real difference, as it were, in quite a hyper local way for that estate where the work is taking place. Whereas by contrast, if you've got a contract which is being let by housing management, which is borough wide for a certain kind of repair, for example, then you take a different approach, maybe consulting at a higher level with the TCC and thinking about what the kind of borough wide intervention could be. So it's happening now, but it's happening without reference to a rigid overarching framework, and it's that framework which the work that the council's procurement team are putting in place, which will just give a slightly more kind of consistent and uniform approach to it.
Thank you. And before I open it up to the floor, my question really is, what difference has this? I don't get a feeling from this paper about what difference having a social investment strategy has made. What are we ever doing differently than we were doing before? Are we just measuring it? And how much is it costing us to measure it and do it? I mean, that's not in the paper. I mean, how much is having a social investment strategy and officers to deal with is costing us money, possibly, which could be spent on doing social investment. I just don't get a feeling that, you know, we're now doing this differently because we have this strategy. And I don't feel that the report, if we are doing things differently, which I'd love to believe, I don't think the report brings that home to me as the casual reader, not the casual reader, the interested reader.
So I would say that part of the answer to that is exactly what we were saying in the answer to Councillor Ham's question, which is that even if all this achieved was bringing a sense of clarity and transparency to the arrangements that are already in place in order to be able to inform decision making for the future about, for example, the return on investment that we are getting for the subsidised leases that already exist, I think I would argue that there is value in that. But I think the work has already gone beyond that, in that what we've done is we've created a kind of structured way for us to think about. So exactly in reference to the last answer, if we didn't have an overarching approach, we'd be doing it in an ad hoc way, which might be hitting the right buttons, but people would be improvising it. What this is trying to do is to have a less improvised, more structured and targeted approach, which is saying, here are the tools we think we want to focus on the use of. Here are the outcomes which we're going to focus on, so that we can, rather than having a set of improvised interventions, have something which is kind of pointing in the same direction. So yes, we might have achieved social value from a number of contracts in the same way, and this would have ratcheted up the amount of money that's coming through that, but it's enabling us to target it and measure it, and then kind of give an account to residents for what we're doing in a way that we previously wouldn't have been able to do, and which other boroughs which don't have this approach wouldn't be able to do. And of course, it's kind of, I mean, what in terms of what we're spending on it, it really is just these two guys, you know, who are doing the work, which is partly a kind of council-wide coordination effort and partly a kind of measuring and reporting effort. And it was a very deliberate decision taken by the council in the kind of post-Grenfell period that we wanted to do that in a much more kind of deliberate and transparent way. So I'd say that's the case. I mean, it's a completely legitimate political debate then about whether you feel as it were that case is made. But
Shall I add my head? Would you want to?
Well, I just wanted to say that that's not clear from the report, I suppose, is really what I want to say. So what difference you're making, and that is a perfectly legitimate response, and bringing order out of chaos and therefore better focus. I mean, that's what orders should be bringing you, is better focus. But it's not clear from the report that, you know, you have created this strategy this time, you've got these ones in the mix, and that these are the benefits it's going to bring. So if we're talking about, you know, what this report should look like in the future, those are some of the things that I would expect to see.
Or even sooner, my forward is notably absent from this. I'm thinking that maybe I might try
We're all
and capture
grateful, yes.
some of that in my
Yes.
forward. And if it helps, what I would say to the committee is I probably shared the question you've asked, which is a very legitimate question. I've probably myself asked the same question. And what has become clearer to me at the time that I've been working with Molly and Amy is that what they're doing is much more than this narrow piece of SRI, is because we do have this bigger piece of work with BCS, which is not articulated here. I think that's a really helpful comment. Where we failed in the past is that what we haven't managed to do is get the community piece and property lease piece working together properly. Either we probably haven't actually had anybody really doing that job, and that these two wonderful ladies are actually building those relationships which we need to build with the BCS, because you can't just tell them and say, oh, by the way, we want to try this and this. I mean, these are very long-standing, important relationships with very good providers often, and they are building those relationships. So as we kind of build up to that next piece of work and the consultation discussion, they are actually holding the room for that, because we don't have the capacity or probably the least knowledge in communities to do that work. We don't have anybody else to do that work in the council, basically. And it's been dawning on me that a lot of that, not all of it, will sit with them, and that's not captured anywhere here. And you're absolutely right, but I think that is part of, and because you're now getting those calls and picking up that work, aren't you, quite a lot? Is that fair, Christine?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you.
Is that helpful?
Very helpful. Now I'm going to open it to any other councillors on the floor, and I know that Councillor Denko wants to ask a question.
Yes, thank you. And I do agree with you, Chair. And I think I would say it should be a science, not an art, actually. I think this is really what I've been feeling, very much so. These things are measurable, and there are other councils measuring them, and we have to see what other councils do. But that wasn't going to be my question, actually. My question was going to be about the potential impact of the Procurement Act, which is coming up. I know we dipped a toe in procurement. We've done this before. I did a huge report on procurement some years ago. And we went into every crevice, and it wasn't a beautiful story, as you said. My concern is if we're going to be using, and there has been some locally in North Carolina, we're going to be using some of our small to medium enterprises locally for the social impact that can have. Do we have a better time frame for paying them? Because unlike the very large enterprises, they can't absorb another month or whatever. And if they're let down with suppliers or something, which happens, they're going to have to wait before they can. All of those things. We don't want local companies coming in, which has happened in the past. Or fantastically, at last we've got a contract with the council, and they have to wait for problems, issues that come up, not with their own making, and they don't get paid, and then they go bucks, and that has happened in the past. So this is a really, really good positive. And I hear from local small contractors, why council never use us, we know what we're there, etc., etc. I wouldn't want to recommend any of them, and then think, actually they're going to have to hang on because we're very bad at paying. I'm not sure if we've got better. So that's impact of the Procurement Act, and can we pay people on time and work that out so that that doesn't disadvantage smaller businesses?
I would. So I think we need to kind of caveat it slightly. What we don't have here is the council's procurement experts. If you see what I mean,
It's a really good question.
It is a really good question.
But not necessarily for this
And I wonder, I guess one kind of
it's all about social value.
one seed I might plant with you is, I think I'm right in saying that on the social value strategy that procurement group are putting together is on the forward plan, is coming to a decision in the next few months.
Yeah.
And so it might be that if this is a thread that the committee wants to pull on, it could ask to scrutinise that with the procurement people here, perhaps alongside Molly and Amy, or to get into some of the detail of how the mechanics of that procurement would work. But I don't know, guys, if you kind of, even at a high level, know how the procurement team are looking at those issues, for example, to do the
If I could just interject at this stage, I did, when discussing potential KPIs for the corporate services for the OSC recently, ask if we could have some KPIs on how good we are as a payer, how good we are to do this essentially.
Has been very patchy over the years.
And as far as I understand it, we're not too bad, but I have asked for some KPIs on that, which is
I think that's
another
something
way
we
of looking at it.
think about, but also the Procurement Act, this month is going to be enacted, and we have to, are we ready for that? And
I think we've had a report on that to the committee.
Getting another one another report.
So I can't remember, earlier
had
in the
one.
year, yeah, so we've had one about the preparation for it. And then we've got one coming again in the new year to look at how that's all.
I mean, okay, well, it's, payment is a big thing, you know, for the smaller businesses. Do we pay on time? Okay,
Well, I will, remember again to talk about, to ensure that that is in the KPIs as well.
thank you.
Any other questions from the floor? Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed. Well done to coming to a first OSC. Yes, you were to me. If bigger we were, it was probably me what did it. So apologies and thank you very much.
Shall I stay in?
I really like to, yeah.
Understand.
Right. So the next paper that we're turning to is the maxilla paper, which is an additional paper. Take it as a personal comment. You've got such a smile. Offices and council. But thank you all very much for attending. So Emma, is it you introducing this one again?
Oh, gosh. I don't really, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can do. Yeah, I would like to. We didn't discuss, as you have a choice of three.
Josh.
So
Do you want to do it, Josh?
you do it, Josh.
I'll
Go on.
start,
Who's
Chair.
been on
Thank you.
well, you've been on it the longest, Sarah.
Yeah, so we'd like to introduce the report about maxilla. Conscious that it's had a lot of interest in the committee ever since the project was announced prior to Grenfell and had that kind of a re-evaluation post Grenfell.
Mary is as well.
Just look how the
8
committee.
years ago, we're talking, let's just remind them.
Adult social care is the client of property here at the council, and our aim is to have an adult social care new service moving from St Mark's Road to Maxilla in North Kensington, so we can provide the best services we possibly can to our residents. In addition to that, there's also a community aspect attached to that as well, which the council agreed upon after the Grenfell tragedy, and we're working with Maxilla CIC in order to produce a community, more youth-focused area of the project that will include access for a range of services that the CIC would like to do as well. Now, I'm conscious that, which has been a great pain of mine, which officers here know, the length of time it's taken to move this project along, and I think everyone is very, very aware that it's having an impact not just on the community, but also on council resources, on funding, on budgets, ever increasing costs and inflation, but how that's impacting indeed our adult social care service users as well. Because St Mark's Road, those who have visited, is not a particularly pleasant place. It's not, it doesn't live up to any standards, and plus it has a lot of stairs for an area that's serving people who have physical disabilities as well. So we're really here to obviously take the committee's feedback and view and recommendations on what we'd like to us to focus on, even more so than we have so far on flexibility.
Can I just add to that,
Yes,
that this was the first piece of co-production work we did with the community. And it was a commitment we made up to fire. So this is the first. I think there's going to be lots of lessons we'll never be as. It's a really important project that we want to do.
Thank you. Lucy, do you want to start with the question?
Sure. Thank you. One thing I found, and this is my first time looking at a maxilla, is of course it has been a long process, but I think the paper lacks, please forgive me if I'm sincere, it lacks clarity and vision. I'm so sorry. And for me as a new person, I keep looking at these figures that look bigger and bigger, and the spend that you spend so much money on it already. And yet, I read the paper and I couldn't really understand where are we going. And have we taken into account the change of the, financial environment, everything, the cost of build, all this stuff. I find it a little bit scary. So I would love some input on that, please.
Christina, do you want to start?
You start, I think you might have a political answer and then I can.
Because there's a kind of political and a financial answer. So, and Stacey, by the way, is now our project manager on this. So she probably will answer more detail. So that your question is lack of detail and sort of clarity on why we're doing this and why we're spending so much. Is that,
Yes.
is that fair?
And vision, yeah, absolutely.
Vision, okay. So, again, this is a project I've known about for some time, but I inherited last September. And I think, as Josh said, we absolutely need to deliver better facilities for our on this adult social care. So nobody disagrees with that. And there's a lot of history to why we're in. And originally, many years ago, we were going to have that in this building, and then there was again, colleagues can probably explain it better, but there was the building was squatted, and out of that whole history, emerged this agreement that we would use part of it for adult social care and part of it for the community. So it's a very unusual project in every way. I've never been involved in anything like this, and I don't think the council have really done anything like this. So I think probably some of the lack of clarity and vision comes out of the fact that it's just had such a strange history, and it didn't necessarily come out of that. Yeah, it evolved. It evolved for different reasons, not the normal, in a slightly abnormal way. And I think the cost element, but Stacey can say more about that detail, is just the time it's taken, the complex, and it's becoming more complex. We discovered with Transport for London, there's additional problems we hadn't anticipated now because of the Westway and things they want to do. The time it's taken, the fact that all building projects have gone up in cost, inflation, and these added complexities. Have I even begun to answer your question?
But I don't think that's been reflected in this paper.
No. Okay.
And I think, so, yes, and that was my big.
I think probably people just didn't know how much history to add to the.
Yes, a bit of background to it, yes.
Yeah, because you could probably write.
I think various papers have been to various places in the past with the vision, with the pictures, and I think
that what Bruce's saying is relevant because I'm pretty sure the committee is going to ask to see another paper fairly soon or an update on this, and so that's helpful input from PC about what should be in.
No, definitely. Because some people like you know a huge amount about this.
I'm trying to forget it.
Whereas other colleagues are newer to this and don't have all that background knowledge.
And also, any member of the public reading this paper needs to, do try and make sure that papers come into this committee are comprehensible and comprehensive enough for our residents to understand as well.
Joanna. Apologies for the order if I picked somebody else's question up. For me, I read this and I looking forward. You appointed ARC in August to demolish. It takes 5 months to demolish. You were talking about consultation and design about what you want to build, which will take 5 months. I didn't get what you're building here. I don't think you've got an idea. You seem to, it's almost as if you're going to demolish it and you're going to come up with your idea about what it is, and then you're going to cost it in the second session. And so either the paper is not clear or the vision, as Pretty says, is not clear, but it is coming, it is ringing massive alarm bells with the thing. And we look at this paper and we go, this is an open checkbook when we don't have unlimited finance. And we don't actually know where it's going because I don't know if you can answer, if you know where it's going.
I think it's a shame that there is a diagram and it should have been attached to this because it's very clear what's going to be in there. Something's come up with TfL. So there's going to have to be some redesign because of pillars, the West Station and all the work done. But there is a very useful diagram and that should have been attached, I think, because it would have been very clear what's going to be where and what the uses are.
And you talk about you're still going to have another 5 months of design and discussions with the community. So is there a design or isn't there?
There is, but there's going to have to be some changes now because of something that's come up with TfL.
So that consultation is as a result of the TfL, because it reads as if it is just you're going out to consultation for the first time.
No, we're not going out to consultation, so we already have an existing approved planning commission for the scheme. We do, yes. And so as Sarah picked up, the redesign is coming about because of changes to building regulations primarily, but also TfL quite recently with regards to the Westway requirements, they are wanting more access to pillars. And so as a result of that, we need to look at rearranging some of the rooms in terms of their uses.
All again, useful things to think about when supporting again.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to break out of my circle and go straight to Portia because I know you need to leave early. Is that right? Any questions you'd like to ask?
Thank you, Chair. This project, I was there from the first day when it was started in Maxilla Social Club, and I'm afraid
It started.
a lot of. Sorry?
It started before that.
No. The discussion was in Maxilla Social Club when everyone wanted to know what that space was when Niles was in the space to get him out.
Yeah.
So 6 million or whatever was ring fenced to initially to run this project. Maxilla CIC, they did a presentation in Bay 20, they got the contract. And I just don't understand why all this money is going to waste with nothing coming up off the ground. The demolition, what does that mean? Is it going to be demolished to the ground or it's just going to be in the inside? Maxilla, they had a plan for what will be inside. You know, the cafe, the whatever. Maxilla at St. Mark's Road, that building is not fit for purpose. So why aren't we focusing on this? In the last budget meeting, there's £70,000 were in it for Maxilla. Where is that money going? I just don't understand. The puzzle's not coming together. You know, is it possible for us to have a report? Because from October to 2024 to February 2025, can we have a report on that first mileage, please, to see what's happening? Because we've been waiting for 4 years on this project, and it's this. I think this is one of the most important projects, considering the adults and social care facility that will be inside of it. Can officers promise that this project will be delivered? Because I just don't.
Losing faith.
Yes, Chair, I am losing faith because.
Could someone address those concerns?
I think actually, part of the problem has been the project management over time. I think we can all agree that it hasn't been good enough. But now we have a very good project manager sitting next to me, and she's really taking a grip of it. I think there's been a few anomalies that have come up, particularly this issue around TfL and some changes in the regulations, which is around fire safety. So it's really important. We can't, we need to look into this properly. But I think we're all committed to delivering this. We know adult social care cannot stay in St. Mark's Road, and we want the community space to be available for the community. And it is our first piece of co-production, and we need to make sure it happens.
Another thing, Maxilla City used to have regular meetings, keeping, stakeholders informed about what's going on. What happened to that? Why has it stopped? Why isn't there no form of communication with the directors of that company? And why are they?
We met
No.
today.
Yeah, but the thing is, people are concerned. The place has been.
So, Sarah, do you want to comment on the current level of?
Well, should I?
Yeah.
I think in fairness, by the way, Portia, I think everything you've said is absolutely fair and true, and I think everyone feels your frustration. So we did meet with the Maxilla CIC today. They're pretty frustrated about the pace as well, and I think that without trying to speak for them, I think if they were here, they would probably say the reason they haven't provided updates is because nothing, not enough has been happening. Although it is true, we do have a direct commission report that. So I think just to sort of, I guess, echo what Sarah said, there have been, this would always have been quite an unusual and difficult project to deliver. nobody's ever done a project like this in the council before, but I think, and both Christine and Stacey are all new to this, and that's been part of the problem. There's been a sort of turnover of different councillors, different project managers, and somebody gets started and then they pass it on, and time goes on, blah, blah, and it's difficult. Meanwhile, there's been an enormous focus, rightly, on housing since Grenfell, but this is also a very important project, as you say. And I think it's at times fallen between the cracks and fallen between different people. And what we're trying to do now is really grasp it and say we've got to get on with this, we've got to deliver this. Not least as you rightly say, because 10 marks isn't good enough, is it?
So I think, Portia, what we can say is that we, as a committee, have now put it firmly in our sights and on our agenda. And at the end of this meeting, we'll discuss when we next want to. At the end of this discussion, we'll talk about recommendations for future reports and also frequency of future reports on this. And so your thoughts are taken on board. So I'm now going to move back into line.
I find it very difficult reading this report because it was almost a case study in negative transformation. People will know that I've been boring a lot about transformation, how positive it can be. It's almost a recipe for putting together things and thinking on the public management way. Welcome, Stacey. I think you're a hero for on the line, but taking a grip at this. I mean, it was I may have misunderstood some. This report is confusing in itself, let alone the picture it's trying to paint about a complicated and difficult project. But the bald facts seem to be that we have arrived at a place where we spent 1.75 million. We've got a building that's virtually derelict and can't be used. We have liabilities under the lease to PFL, which presumably we're paying current money towards, and also we have repairing responsibilities as well. And we have an unknown relationship going forward, a different relationship proposed going forward from the PFL Council Westway arrangement to a PFL Westway arrangement, and then in some way back to us for part of the space and then to somebody else for other part of the space. And none of this is defined. So I went through and I basically, if I was sitting in Stacey's position, if the sort of flags come out, there's no vision to the project because it isn't actually the very, very worthwhile the CIC project and the high needs health project seem to be completely different in many ways. And are they part of the same project or are they a separate part of the same space, which is at two projects? There's a whole lack of definition around that. There's hardly any foundations, as I've said, with regard to them sorting out the leases and the liabilities. And I don't know whether legal people have been through that and clarified that. None of that comes through and there's no control because we are in a position where we spent 1.75 out of an original budget of 4.4 up to 6 point something or other, up to 8.9 now. And there's no building regulations improvement in this, no redesign improvement in this, no delayed and cost increases after COVID and inflation and all the rest of it. As a sort of building professional, I would guess that we're going to spend another 10 million on this on top of what we've done before. So my hunch would be that you put a figure of 12 million around this, and it's gone from 4.4 million to 12 million, and we don't know where we're going at the moment. That's what comes out of the paper. Now, what comes out of the answers for the bench here is that there's a lot more that's known about this and being focused on. My challenge, I think my question would be, could we very quickly, pick up a point Mary's making, have a report back to either our November or December meeting? And it's got to be that quick to put what you've already got and the outstanding questions. The risk register needs RAG rating, so in terms, when I put red ragging on all of the others, but I mean, and is 3.5 distance from the columns, which is in the risk register. Is that the limitable? PFL and TFL actually, if they start implementing the repair work that have to happen on Westway at some point, probably going to be out of use and impossible to be under for health and safety reasons for 2 or 3 years. Now, has this been worked as a risk into the future situation? We now move forward and get this show back on the road, have we actually got something in place where there's going to be an overall existential risk to
I think, well, everything that you've raised is absolutely true, and I can say definitely say as league members, we've asked all the same questions in all our meetings. So we are very, very aware and very aligned to the fact that everything that you've said, we have said ourselves. Now, in terms of the report, I agree. It's poor for the committee to scrutinise on, and they'll no doubt get you on with the plans and the architect drawings and everything else that's going to come with that. We all have that to hand. And part of your question, it is part of it is a shared space between ASC and Maxilla with separate kind of jurisdictions and a way for them to use exclusively as well. But we'll all get that to you. Secondly, yes, it is on the risk. Certainly, yes, it is read. Yes, it is raised when we meet with the exec directors all the time. And as Gareth knows, every briefing I have is like, where are we with Maxilla? In fact, it's a permanent fixture on our briefings. As I said, ASC is a client of the corporate property department, so we have to work really closely with them. So everything's not on the ASC gift to give. The only thing I want to give is have proper adult social care facility in North Kensington, which is suitable and normal. I know Portugal has been pushing that for years as well. So I share your frustration, and I do get it. But we are trying to address it with Stacey on board now, with Christine as well, and with Gareth working behind the scenes as well. We will get there. But I agree,
Could I be more positive? Yes, and transparent. Could I propose that we let Mary have a resolution that we need perhaps think about?
Or make a recommendation.
Make a recommendation to that we have a report back probably within a month at our November meeting about what you already know, and then by December as to what you develop between now and December. And hopefully by then there'll be clarity on the majority of risks, whereas at the moment the paper doesn't actually bring us anything that we can be positive and friendly about.
Could I just, so we raised particular questions about PFL today. If you want us to come back a month, we will not have the answers to those questions.
No.
If you give us a little bit more time, I think we might be able to give you a little bit more time.
My challenge would be that you give us what you've got in a month's time. That'll be an outstanding. That's fine. Because there are so many dimensions.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, clarifying what the lease situation is, and it is something that's presumably already something we know about. Because there's been a proposal to make a change.
Those are also conversations that are ongoing.
Should we just carry on?
Right.
Can I suggest that we carry on around the table and then come back to the question of what the next report, when the next report should be and what it should be? Gareth, do you want to try something?
If I could, just one brief thing about Pascal's question about the relationship between adult social care and the Maxilla CLC area within the overall space. Because I think one of the things it's kind of important to give you some assurance around is that they haven't been being developed in isolation. And one of the which Josh mentioned in his introduction, this type of endeavour is something new for us in terms of doing something jointly with the community as a project development. And throughout the months that we've been developing this, teasing out that relationship and how those services can work together in the same building, rather than just having a red line between them, has been a really positive stay between the council and that community interest company. So whilst there will be some areas within the adult social care space where we'll need to be safe and secure in terms of access, because people with profound multiple learning disabilities and disabilities, people with behaviours that are challenged, there are other opportunities where our service users, who are also members of the community, will be able to participate in the communal areas, in cafe spaces, and some of the activity rooms and IT suites. We've looked at ways with Maxilla CLC how we can share those. So there have been some really quite positive.
Again, I think the point is not reflected in the paper. And you know, for example, I was going to come on to, and I was getting prepared to give questions. Is presumably it's a business case for the community aspect of it. And that again needs to be part of what we're looking at, the long-term financial viability of it. But let's move on to Greg.
Thank you, Mary. I want to actually pick up on one of the points that Will introduced, and it's the risk. Well, firstly, the risk register, and it's by no means the worst risk register I've seen from council officers.
This is the one included in the report.
It's the one in the report, the Appendix A. Because there's a lot of good analysis within it, but it's not at the moment presented like a risk register because none of these items within it are analysed by the impact of each of them or the likelihood of occurrence. And until you've done that piece of work, it's not really a risk register, and you can't evaluate each one of the items. And there are some really good courses out there on risk. I'm sure the LGA runs one, but I think next time we see this report, I think it would be very helpful to have the risk register presented as a risk register so we can really understand which of these are the ones we ought to focus on of all of the many points that have been brought out here and analysed. I think that would be a very useful piece of work for you as well.
I think it's probably fair to say that the management risk is absolutely part of this project. This was an attempt to kind of summarise in narrative terms what the risks are that we're working with, rather than to produce the risk register.
There is a risk register with more on it.
Oh, but this is not a risk register. This is
no, exactly. We weren't trying to show a risk register.
Well, I think I'd probably quite like to see the risk register then, because that would be useful to me. Whereas this is just a list of issues and some mitigations. So that's dealt with that. And then the second point is I'm wondering what might happen to the St Mark's Road site. Is there a potential for it to be used to offset some of the costs that have already been put into this and are clearly going to increase over time? Has indeed there been an option, and I appreciate you're not keen on the St Mark's Road site for the reasons that you set out, Josh, but is there an option appraisal there to consider keeping it instead of sinking all these costs into Maxilla and adapting it?
It's a really good question, Greg, and it's something that we've discussed as well with Gareth and with Bernie as well, our exec director at ASC, to look into options for that. As it stands, the building cannot be used probably for anything else. So if we were to have an option B, not that there is one necessarily right now, it'd probably be the whole building would have to come down, or we'd have to rebuild it, because it's just not suitable for anything really long term. We can survive as it is right now, but long term, it's not accessible. It leaks. The roof garden you can't get into. There's art officers working there in not particularly good conditions. It's hot in the summer and freezing in the winter, which is why obviously we've tried to aim for Maxilla as well. So if something were to happen to St Mark's, it would not be in the current project that it's in. I don't know if you want to come Gareth for that just specifically.
Just the additional cost of that on that basis in terms of decant, finding somewhere else, but other space could be used within a period while something else is being done in St Mark's or an alternative space. So in terms of kind of mitigations for risk, one of the risks is the project at Maxilla isn't viable, and we would need to go and find an alternative option for the other social care services. St Mark's Road would be on the list of that, but there would be a list.
So has St Mark's Road got a sale value that it can be put on here as an offset against the costs?
Yes, so it's probably for me to fix on if that's okay. And so the plan at the moment and the decision is that we're moving what's at St Mark's into the Maxilla. You would, I mean, if I'm really open, you wouldn't have started with building the whole of the adult day care provision and a community centre under the Westway. But that was the proposal, and that's been there for a number of years, and that's why we're doing it. And I think there's been a really good job done, particularly by Adult Care over those years, to get that combination. When the project is finished and Adult Care move across, in the meantime, we'll be looking at what are the alternative uses for that site. So it stops being an Adult Care site; it becomes a council site. What's the next steps with this? And then you just go through that as an option appraisal with, would you put housing on it? Would you sell it? Would you repurpose it? Could you do something residential with it that might be for adult care or something? And we just need to go through that process. Do we keep the existing building? Do we demolish the existing building? So as we move forward, knowing that there's an end date, that's the work that we'll do. And then that would be a separate decision that would need to be taken and within that, in fact, as to the future of that building. But we're not at that place yet in terms of thinking. I hope that helps. Is it also just worth it, whilst I've got the floor, just talking about the lease issues, just because you asked about the lease and the complexity, but this is where it's highly unusual to be in such a complicated set of arrangements around leases, because it does start with Transport for London, who've now switched it to Places for London, so the new PFL. that lease goes to RBKC. It goes from RBKC because of historic arrangements that this wouldn't necessarily do anywhere else, to the Westway Trust. It's come back from the Westway Trust to the council for this project. And then we have what is it when it's done? Is it a lease that goes to Maxilla for them to run the whole and adult care to be a tenant? Or is it for adult care to occupy and Maxilla are subsidiary to that, but organising all the community, or do corporate property hold it? So we're having a discussion. We haven't got a conclusion on that at this point in time. All we know is that it's quite complicated with all of the arrangements, and we'll try to get the best that we can moving forward, that make sure that adult care get what they need and that the community get what they need in terms of access to community space through the lease arrangements that we've got. Some of that complexity we can't lose because it's there historically, but you'd have to say, if you're going to build a building and spend this kind of money where you've got the risks that we've identified and that we know are there around, we've got the Westway above it, so we know that we're spending money, that sometimes we may have some closed periods or something may happen, and then that's a function of it. But the leases are we can simplify it a bit, but it has got a bit of unusual backwards and forwards. But once it's up and running, whoever's got the head lease on it and then all the subleases to it, we can make it work. There are structures to make that work in real life that will, and how the building then gets operated between the adult care use and the community use. I think it'll be smoother than it appears when you just look at the lease arrangements, because people will collaborate and make it work on the ground as a living, breathing project.
Can I just add a question from Anne on leases that she sent me?
I was going to go to Sydney next.
No, I'll ask it at the end of my story.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. Most of what I wanted to ask has already been covered, but I just got a quick question on costing. It was on page 6, risk 7.1. The risk register specifically has mitigation actions and costings. And obviously, putting my legal hat on, I haven't seen any costings in relation to legal costs at all. I wasn't sure what the position was with regards to the costings mitigation in relation to legal risks, because of course they're going to be quite a large number. That question makes sense.
Yes, it does.
It's written
To start and then I'll come in.
Yeah, I mean, probably on the overall budget, it's probably worth saying that we've seen it grow over time, and one of the reasons it's grown is when it hasn't included some of the fees that are included in the project, because the original budget was around construction. So within the fees element of the budget, we will have a legal sum. So with the detailed budget, it'll be there. I don't know if we've got a figure in there now or a line for it, but Stacey.
No, we do have a figure for it. It will be mainly for our internal legal team to work with PFL and their legal team to orchestrate the license alteration. Thank you.
Lucy, sorry, go on.
Don't worry, it was just because Anne sent me something about leases. Yeah, quite a depressing what was said. Paper to read, not really what I was expecting. That paper which constantly my committee is asking for an update, and we've not received anything for the 2.5 years I've been a councillor. I remember Sarah bringing it up when in my first ever ANC meeting, which is when I first learned about it. So I just felt like I read through it, waiting for the moment when it was going to explain to me why there had been such a severe delay, and kind of an understanding of that, because I think that is a big question that people have been asking. And then also not really referencing, which we spoke about before, St Mark's Road. I mean, we went on a visit there last summer, and they were talking so sort of desperately about how excited they were to move into the building, with the mindset this was going to be this year, or the end of this year, or kind of early 2025. And how much they struggle in that building. And I just think it's very depressing that at the moment, the timeline saying end of 2026, that was going to be one of my questions. How do we have faith in kind of the timeline you're giving us when it keeps changing? And then, yeah, so kind of they were main points. I mean, I'd love to see some more on this and to get more updates. And yeah, I think the paper was quite disappointing length, and it just kind of lacked a lot of, and so I can't imagine someone coming into this new having any idea what kind of the scope of this project and the kind of history of it. So yeah, understanding, having kind of confidence in the timeline, and yeah, interesting to hear what you've got to say on that. And I just think also what this reflects to the North Kent community, that we've not been able to deliver, and it's still ongoing. We don't really hear updates. We don't really hear much on it. Is quite depressing for me. And then the question that Anne was asking was just on leases, and in terms of the TfL lease, why was this not dealt with 9 years ago? When it's originally signed off, and why is this a problem that's going to continue and maybe delay us even more? So sorry, that was a bit of an overload, but they're my thoughts.
Do you want me to?
Just the leasing, I'll come in out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened 9 years ago and what discussions took place. But when I can't really. I don't think it's going to be worthwhile going over kind of what went wrong over a period of time, but I do appreciate that and the frustration around the delay, because you think, how long does it take to deliver something that should be so simple? And I guess there's a history of change with it over time, because it was originally a daycare centre, and then after Grenfell it was squatted, and I think we had the history at the beginning, and the community use was added in, and then what Sarah referred to, but which was kind of project management things that weren't right in the first place, which we're now trying to tackle and get right, is all the things like that. Why weren't the risks that we've listed in the appendix? A number of those risks could have been looked at some time ago, but actually that we've only just started to pick them up, and we're looking at them now to make sure that we've boxed them off to get them right. Some of them are new. And so it's not a lease issue with Transport for London right now. It's actually about access and maintenance that the issue is right now. But there are third parties that you would expect in any project that you would have those as third party risks, and you would be dealing with them at an earlier stage. We appointed a contractor at the time for the whole thing, and so they took forward all of the planning, and really all of that could have been at that point. We have now got to the point where we're at the first stage of an actual contract with them, where we're doing all of the preparatory works, finalising planning and building regulations, and that's the time that we're now getting into the detail of sorting out all the risks. I think we have to accept that we could have done better with that. Of course we could have done it. All of those things could have been ticked off at an early point in time. I honestly don't think we could have done much about what we're seeing as cost increases. It's essentially, it's the project that's being designed. There's a reasonable amount of detail to the design. It's been through planning. It's costed. There are additional costs that we are calculating to work out what the final cost will look like. But at the moment, we've got a budget, and we know what the budget is, and we're trying to do some redesign that will get us to within the budget where we can, so that we don't come with enormous cost increases over time. But what we have a choice now. But are we aiming for the delivery? And most projects exaggerate how quickly they can move things and how cheap they're going to be, and most of them end up overspending and being longer. So if we can be really clear on the final scope, what the design is, and we procure a contract based on that, and we stick to it, and we don't make any changes, I think we've got a chance of delivering to the timetable that we're saying. And if we can get that right, then we'll fix ourselves with the timetable when we get to that final contract point, but we're not there yet. There's still some detail to work through. So I think it's right to have concerns about whether it truly will be delivered by the date that we said in 2026 as well, because we've still got to confirm that with the contracts that we're looking at. So I know it doesn't sound, I mean, I think just being honest and open with you, I think we just have to acknowledge the stage that it's at and the level of detail that we've got to get through to guarantee that we'll actually finish then. But having said that, Stacey's the person who's reviewed the timetable, and she has indicated that with all of that we know, this is our best estimate at this point in time of what the timetable will look like.
Yeah,
If
that's
everything falls into place that needs to fall into place. We could have chosen, because you wouldn't automatically have chosen to do this then. Do you say, actually, we can't do it, let's come up with other options? I think we would have ended up spending more money and spending more time looking at all of those alternative options. So I think our best step forward is to carry on and deliver it. We know it's late, we know it's going to cost more than was originally said, but it will deliver what was intended, apart from both adult care and from the community perspective when it's finished.
And just add, just in terms of keeping us and committees up to date, as we've mentioned before, but just a bit more transparency on constantly where we are with this, because it's been that kind of generalist question mark that all the time I've been here, God knows how much time for everyone else, and I think that's what makes it such a mystery, that people are coming to you constantly asking what's going on, etc. And then today we read this paper and just don't really feel like, we've gained a huge amount from it. So yeah, and just to make it sort of feel like it's priority, because it's not felt like it has been, and I really think it should be top of the list.
Thank you. So I'm going to add in some
One question, just out of curiosity.
short questions.
I just wanted to know, are we paying for security costs at the moment for the building?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
So if I could add a sub-question to that, we're presumably paying PFL at the terms of our lease as well.
Westway.
Westway.
Westway. Yes.
Westway.
So I think as the lease, no, we're not paying Westway. So as I said, the lease arrangements is from TfL to us to Westway.
There aren't costs.
There isn't any cost associated with Westway at this point in time.
So it's a lease with no payments. If it bought the lease or
Effectively peppercorn.
right, okay. But we've got presumably insurances and all the other costs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are costs of it lying in it. That's absolutely. Thank you. Okay. I was going to ask. I was worried by 3.7, which indicates a growing, concentrating on the learning disability aspect, a growing need. Are we certain now that our current design is big enough for learning disability needs in the future? And if not, have we been able to increase that space within the envelope? I was really spooked when we talked about the point that Will raised about the fact that what happens if this TfL road needs maintenance and do that? We just remember Hammersmith Fire during the time of the Olympics. What if we have a sudden realisation that this is crumbling and we've moved our learning disability service in there? I mean, that's a humongous risk. It seems to me. So really, I suppose my challenge is, Christine said we've gone so far, let's carry on. But actually, I don't accept that that's necessarily right. It's like boiling frogs, isn't it? Is this the time to stand back and say, is this the right place to do it? Or it's never too far to say, okay, we've sunk these costs, let's look at some other building. Are we certain this isn't the point at which we will choose our options are closing again? That's my challenge.
On the learning disability methods question, population is projected to increase between now and 2040, according to the Poppy Pansy statistics. In terms of the use of this space as the equivalent of the St Mark's Road space, it will do what we need to do across that period. That's on the basis that the use is primarily by service users with our most profound needs.
Yes.
And we do have other day services and day centres across the borough in places.
But at the moment you have 12 clients.
Yeah.
Well, I think reading from this report, if that increases to 18 or 20, is it going to be big enough, or is that a ridiculous projection? It's only going to increase to 14.
It's likely to get to 15, but that's manageable in the spec.
Okay. So just again, something we'd like to be assured about, because it mentions in 3.7 there is data protection, but it's not enough to say that to us. You need to say, actually, we've taken that into account and it will be big enough, with a bit of tolerance. But if I can just come back to the options proposal.
Yeah, and I think it's a really, do you want to do it? I was going to say it's a good question. So,
Well,
to just your point in regard to
Technical stuff.
Westway and obviously the maintenance requirements. So we are working quite closely with their structural engineer to look at the kind of their maintenance schedule and how that would impact the programme. So I will ensure obviously we update the paper that's reflected on there.
And it's not just planned maintenance, it's the chance of, you know, a catastrophic, oops, we've just discovered it's crumbling, which is what happened on Hammersmith Line. It's not, that's not something.
And Stacey is going to ask them to come and do a survey. It's an inspection.
Okay, because I think, you know, that could be the tiebreaker essentially in taking the step back and saying, okay, you know, the risk is high enough for us to say, maybe we should think again.
I think your question's been partially answered, which is that we've already discussed today with Maxwell CIT about getting PFL in. And we'll wait to hear what they say. But I think that the candid answer to your question is if the committee is saying to us that they want us to go back to the CIC and say, depending on what outcome is, we might need to think again about using this building. We could have that. I mean, a promise was made to the community by others, you know, some time ago, in good faith for good reasons at that time. But I think what I'm hearing is that depending on what TfL say to us, and it may be the Maxim are listening to this meeting tonight, what you're saying is that you would like us to at least put that back in some way to.
I mean, there's always a point where you kind of make a decision.
It's a really hard thing.
Change so much.
It's a really hard thing.
And you know, the learning disability services and the Maxim CSE are both very important.
Exactly.
But we don't want to put them in a space that they're then going to have to evacuate, or the chances are high we haven't thought about it enough. And if I can just go back to the costings again, I mean, it's quite frightening to think that you're going to have to demolish it before you can actually get a price for the build. Or that's how the paper reads at the moment.
I'll take that point on board. But no, it's not necessarily the case. They are doing, as part of the redesign and enabling works, they are going to be doing survey works, which will help to inform the main tender works costs. So it isn't necessary that the demolition has to be completed in its entirety to be able to determine what the construction costs will be.
Okay, it does rather look like that in your programme. In 5.2, so maybe that could be clarified in a later iteration, because that really, you know, kind of spend all this money knocking it down, and then find, oops, it's going to cost 16 million, or and then we really would be very happy. So having completed, I'm opening the floor, and it's just Emma. So
thank you, Chair. Steam coming up well, slightly. There were lots of reasons for frustration. You know, we're very much used to the Westway Trust not telling us what they're doing. I still have no idea what they're supposed to be doing to Maxwell Gardens. They didn't tell us. They dug it up, and it's halfway through. And you know what? We're not used to the council just keeping out water councils completely. We've had no consultation whatever. And at what point did we just abandon the charge for public participation, which is public and water councillors? It says that over and over again throughout that document. Public and water councillors. We had to fight to have one meeting with Gary Disney. It took us months and months and months to get an appointment. There was the one meeting at Maxilla, which was some time ago. We just been kept out of the loop. This is, I mean, literally, I live 4 minutes in one direction, Portia lives in 4 minutes in the other direction. We pass it pretty much every single day. We had no idea what was going on, and we've asked them, and it pushes us numerous times. And we've just been kept out of this. Why aren't we kept informed? I mean, we should know what is going on there. And I get, you know, I know nobody's going to question the better facilities for our disabled and severely autistic and so on, all of those, that group. There's no question about that. I've been in that building, and it certainly is fit for purpose. It's not going to be fit for purpose for the next 3-4 years, however long it takes to do. You know, no one's questioning that. What I don't understand is what the rest of it's going to be, because we've had no communication with the CIC. I know a portion of some of the members of it. I don't, because there's been no communication at all. So I don't know what their vision is. You know, cafe and community sounds great, but what is it? What's it going to be? I just don't know.
So
I literally ask it every day.
Question that,
so that's, yeah. And sorry, there was Yeah, and also, yeah, we now know who's in charge and the chain command and so on. And good luck with it, Stacey. But it's been hugely frustrating to be kept out of the loop. Not only that we know nothing's happening, we weren't told that nothing was happening. We just hit a brick wall, and it's really frustrating. We're very invested in our community, and we've been kept out of the loop. So that's one thing. The other thing is, please, can we get on and get some kind of clarity on what's happening? From what I'm hearing, I also share your concerns, Chair, as to whether or not this is ever going to be the right place for very vulnerable people. So,
thank you. So I think there's a question about involving ward councillors in future consultation and stages, and I think the aspect about what the vision is for the community space will be, I hope, answered in the next paper, because we talked about adding in the diagram and a little bit more about what's going to go on there and how it's going to be self-sustaining and so on. So those are all recommendations. I know that Christine very kindly apologised for the lateness of this paper, and yet we've spent a lot of time rather unsupportively being critical of it, and even though I know that you have had lots of other pressures on you, but I think the committee's appetite for another paper covering more points is clear and also quite urgent. So I think I'd urge, I think probably we'll be asking for a paper at the next two meetings, but the ones, so we'd like as much information as possible for the next meeting, covering some of the gaps that we've identified. Sarah, are you concerned about that?
Well, I am, because I'm just concerned about how long it's going to get TfL to come back to us. So
that's fine.
Whether we could do something offline, so we don't take up your valuable kind of select committee, and then come back in, say, January with a much better paper with hopefully all the answers.
When is the next meeting?
We've got one in November, one in
So
December.
I would just add to that this is not the only project Stacey is working on, and there's a balance between us putting together the paper you want from this and getting on with the work that needs to be done. It is within obviously the committee wants it in November, we'll do what we can for November, but I think we could consider that balance. That would be helpful.
Maybe we should ask Maxilla.
We should ask them to come as well.
They represent us, they consult with the community, they meet with the community.
Yeah.
So I think if they came, that would be really helpful too.
Yeah.
Chair, if I could, I think that the first paper, at the very least, needs to have in it what's been put in the responses tonight. And I think that is not something that takes Stacey a lot of work, because actually you've come here tonight with great effort and you've articulated it very clearly. There's a lot of things going on, and I take Mel's point on a number of different parameters. It's going to take a certain amount of time, a variable amount of time, to achieve answers to the questions. And the first step is achieved tonight is we've got some transparency of the situation. We've achieved that as a milestone. The next step in terms of project management milestone would be actually to put in one place in a paper what has actually been discussed tonight. It's the risk register with some bragging on it. It's the plans you've seen. There's a number of loose ends which we've asked about, which you've answered, which are not in the paper. So in fact, if we had an updated paper with your answers tonight at this next stage, then the judgment has to be as to when the substantially additional paper, which I think is what Emma's referring to. And that depends a bit on the main question, which I think is the one you articulated, Mary, which is this existential threat that we could come from the overhanging structure above. And when I don't think the structural engineers will know the answer to that at the moment, because they haven't done the investigations. No. And on taking it's not just Hammersmith and Fulham's flyover, Hammersmith flyover. It's not just that occasion, but several bridges around the UK, and this is a bridge effectively around the UK, have suddenly realised they've got expanding concrete or reinforcement or whatever you want to put it, and they've decided at very short notice that they have to put a stop notice and its use of an emergency program bit. Whether that happens in 6 months or 6 years or whatever, it certainly would impact existentially on the use of this project. And therefore, it not only getting an answer from them, but also understanding what that risk means on the basis that politely, maybe they don't know, if they don't know when. So it's not a question of if, at some point that had to be rebuilt or it'll have to be substantially reinforced. So,
Great, did you want to say something?
Yes, I mean, I'm quite very keen to see a new version of the paper, and I think it's really useful to hear Maxilla as well. I'm conscious next month really isn't that far away. I mean, I think the paper will probably have to be published next week to meet. But whereas January, we will have a meeting in January, and it's not actually that far away, only 3 months or less than 3 months. And I would have said that would be reasonable. I'm sure our meeting next month is probably full anyway.
And that maybe we invite Maxilla's CIC to that meeting. I agree, but if I could just say with that, what I would like to see as chair is a draft of that paper well in advance. I mean, I'm talking well in advance because I am no doubt that I will probably be sending it back for some clarities and extra information, given what we've discussed today, or at least I reserve the right to do that and then have time to do it.
And Stacey's also just said to me, if it would be helpful, perhaps we could provide an interim update for January, which I think would be helpful to kind of demonstrate the progress that we're making. And that's an easier paper to deliver than a formal, which has to go around 52 people that need signed up.
Perfect. Okay, so
That's compromise.
Sorry?
Are you all happy for us to proceed on that basis?
I think we'll wait till we have the paper in. Sorry? What? Sorry.
So that's one question is, if we agree to this time frame, which does seem to make sense, are there any decisions going to be made in the meantime with regard, for instance, to demolition and such like? Or is that going to be put on hold until it's been resolved? How it's going to go forward? Because, once we've demolished it, it's a whole nother.
We're going to be demolished.
Yeah, it won't be, it wouldn't be demolished by January. I think there's already discussions.
Factual arrangements and the rest of it.
That's where the TfL approvals come into play. So this zone of influence that I made reference to in the risk register, that forms part of the approval process that would need to be agreed to by TfL before we could actually progress forward with the demolition. So there isn't a risk at this point in time of demolition occurring.
25.
Yeah, which is why I projected it for later on.
So, yes, when we've got the PFL or whatever it is report, at that time, we'll be thinking we need to make an options, or there needs to be some form of options appraisal about whether it's still viable and the cost and the hazard of it being a not safe space all the time or needing to be interrupted. Jan, are you happy with that, or are you still concerned that it's been drifting on too long at that stage?
No, I think my question, and it goes back to Emma's question about options and reviews, and I genuinely don't know, and I'm trying not trying to step on any toes, is actually whether there is a feasible alternative to split the two into different premises and different buildings. I don't know, but for me, that's.
I mean, the further, Jan is absolutely right. The further we go on, the increasing danger if we just carry on doing it because we've started doing it, which is what it's what local authorities do too often, and we want to avoid.
It's never been discussed. When my understanding is I've inherited this project is that we made a promise to the community to do this, and that's the premise I've been working on, and the team have, and Aaron, Josh. But I think the PSL, the piece of news about that's very new to us. That's happened last
week.
Well, in the last few weeks, it's come. And I think we had exactly the same conversation today with a kick about what does this really mean? We need to get back. We need to get an engineer on site. I think it has put a slightly different dimension on everything about what it's, and there were other concerns already about the leases and all the other bits already. But I think that's a really legitimate question that you as a committee have raised. And I think, as I say, if they haven't listened, if they're watching it tonight, I think we will, put that back to the kick, and I think they should definitely come to the next meeting or meeting we have with you. Is that in any way helpful?
So, sure. What have we agreed? We agreed an interim update of this paper with what's been said and addressed tonight that you already know. First step. And then the second step at some date.
It's a fuller paper in January with kick in, as we're now calling.
And that's getting the CIC, sorry, CIC, sorry, kick.
Tony. And I should also say that Claire asked me to raise some issues around consultation and the vision as well, but I think those will be addressed in the next paper, so I won't raise them individually now. But thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And I've asked to raise people and has commitment of time and resource, so thank you very much.
The shared endeavour.